Part 2 of Hannibal and the Punic War. That's why I did, y'all can see part 1. I'm doing the Battle of Cannae. Hope y'all enjoy part 1, and I'm going to finish off what I left off from Hannibal and his ways in the battle. When Fabius Tinctured as a dictator inspired the consuls of for 216, Lucius Paulius or Gaius Vario took charge of the war against Hannibal. On learning that Hannibal had captured the Roman depot at Cannae in Apulia, the consuls decided to give battle. Hannibal now faced two formidable armies. However, at Cannae, he again selected ground favorable to his tactics, strong cavalry, while the Romans rely on their superior numbers and their fighting skill. Hannibal's plan called for his cavalry, positioned on the flanks of a crescent-shaped line, to defeat the Roman horsemen, quickly to attack the Roman infantry from the rear, as it's pressed upon the weakened center of Spaniards and the Gauls. His superior African troops at the crucial moment were to press from the flanks and completed to encirclement. Complete the encirclement. Plain succeeded, and the Romans suffered 250,000 dead and 10,000 captured as slaves. That's what they did at the time, and they eventually lost anyway. Hannibal. This is a long one. The ancients were found in debating why Hannibal did not immediately march on Rome following his victory at Cannae, but clearly he could not have taken the city after having taken part in numerous battles across Italy. His main objective was not the total destruction of Rome, but a settlement that would free Carthage from Rome intervention. Hannibal had hoped that his victories would bring back the whole side defection of Italian cities from Rome, from the Roman Confederacy. That sounds familiar. Confederacy, like American Confederacy, same thing. However, the only major defection from Rome was Capua, or Capua, how you ever pronounce it. It's C-A-P-U-A, Capua or Capua, what it says in here. When it was obvious to Hannibal that he could not effectively surround Rome with a ring of hostile Italian states, he broadened the conflict, drawn off Romans' manpower, and to spread its resources thin. In 215 BCE, he made an alliance with Philip V of Macedonia, which he was the Edomite. He was a Greek. Doubtless he did not want Philip to invade Italy, but merely to drain Rome's strength by waging war in Greece. The alliance came to naught because Hannibal could not supply Philip with a navy, and because Rome checked Philip with its own navy. Anatolian allies. The First Macedonian War, 214 and 205 BCE. Hannibal also brought Syracuse into the war against Rome. Hiero, ruler of Syracuse and long ally of Rome, died 215 BCE. His grandson, Hieronymus, took the control of the city that made an alliance with Hannibal. Hieronymus was soon killed in a revolt, but the Punic agents gained control of Syracuse. However, Roman control of Sicily was greatly restored by 211 BCE when Syracuse fell. Yeah, when Syracuse fell, right? When Syracuse fell. First reverse following to the defeat of Cannae, the Romans restored back to Fabius' tactics of harassing Hannibal while avoiding formidable engagements. This seems to have rendered Hannibal's tactic skill, superior cavalry, ineffective. Consequently, the Romans were able to retake Capua, however you want to pronounce it, although their resources were heavily stretched by Hannibal's international diplomacy. However, the real blow. The Hannibals came from without. In 209 BCE, the Romans took Carthage and forced Hannibal out of Spain. This main supply route off. This cut his main supply route off. When Romans discovered the Hasdrubal had crossed the Alps to link with Hannibal, they have left a small force to watch Hannibal and marched quickly with their main force to the Matarus River, where they defeated Hasdrubal. Hannibal learned of the defeat when Hasdrubal's head was thrown into his camp. Hannibal knew that he was without hope of reinforcement. For the rest of the Italian campaign, he was generally restricted to Bruttium. Hannibal had no supporting navy and appeared indifferent to the Roman naval supremacy, which in the first place was able to cut off reinforcement, and the second to bring about Uniped invasion of Carthage. Although his tactics in the field, as attested even by Scipio, were brilliant. Scipio, later he became Scipio Africanus. So actually his name was Scipio Africanus anyway, and he named the northern part Africa. They was trying to conquer that region so bad. See, Hannibal tried to go in there and thought he was Mr. Big Shot. But what happened was, like it says here, he was, he had trouble. He cut him off. Rome was powerful in his day. Rome was a powerful nation. The Roman Empire was falling during its axis at this time too. This is when Rome was trying to grow. But it didn't last that long. But they still exist today, known as the American Empire, so-called American Empire, so-called British Empire, in the 20th century and now 21st century as Americans. They still have Roman blood in them. So, that's what this country's found out. You heard the word Confederacy in here. So, we're familiar with that word. So don't act like we don't know. And he himself, by his personal appearance and quick marches up down the Italy, dazzled the Romans and complicated their strategy. He was at the decided disadvantage as regards reinforcement and provisions. 204 BCE, the Italian general Scipio landed in Carthage, what we know as Scipio Africanus. Look, I'm going to try to do a video of him. I don't know if I'm going to have time to get the research on him. It's not that much on him, really. It's just a small peek, but if I ever had some formal research, I will put him out there. Carthage will resist, however, and hostilities were renewed. The two armies met at Zama in 202 BCE in a battle that decided the outcome of the war. This time, Hannibal was made the next year. This time, Hannibal met his match, but he was outnumbered by his superior cavalry and was let down by the commercially minded rulers of Carthage. Hannibal and his army destroyed, escaped. Peace was made the next year. I went too fast. Peace made the next year. Rome severely restricted the Carthaginian navy, demanded a heavily indemnity. Carthage was forbidden to make war outside its African domain, could fight within Africa only with Roman permission, since failure to accept the peace terms would have meant the destruction of Carthage. Hannibal worked for their acceptance and retired to private life in 200 BCE. Hannibal was still only 43. Soon showed that he could be a statesman as well as a soldier. Following the conclusion of peace that left Carthage stripped of its formerly mighty empire, Hannibal prepared to take a back seat for a time. However, the blatant corruption of the oligarch gave Hannibal a chance to re-emerge, and he was elected as a suffect or chief magistrate. The office had become rather insignificant, but Hannibal restored its power and authority. The oligarchy, always jealous of him, had even charged him with having betrayed the interests of his country while in Italy, for neglecting to take Rome when he might have done so. So effectively, did Hannibal reform abuse that the heavily tribute imposed by Rome could be paid by his installments without an additional extraordinary taxation? He also reformed the 104 stipulating that it's a membership chosen by direct election rather than co-option. He also used citizen support to change the term of office in the 104 of the life to a year, with the term limited 2 years. Under the leadership of Hannibal, who proved to be as talented an administrator as he was a commander, intimately was paid well ahead of schedule in Carthage. Once again, focused on the trade, the city-state began once more to strengthen and grow wealthy for the land she possesses. Unlike today's Tunisia, known as Tunis, I just mentioned in Babylon Timbuktu, part 1, y'all can go back to that video I mentioned in Tunis in the beginning of the minutes I mentioned of Tunis, was among the most produced farmland of its age, which is true. In 196 BCE, Hannibal attacked the position, power, and the corruption of the aristocrats so vigorously that they told the Romans he was scheming with Antiochus III of Syria. This is during the time of Antiochus, and he's also in the Antiochus IV, or Philadelphia is probably in your most of you probably have apocryphas by now, you know, talk about this war in Greece. This is a time when Greece already failed, and then Rome were like two empires in one. Assyria planning another war with Rome. A Roman investigation commission was sent to Carthage on a pretext, but Hannibal knew it was an aim at him. He eventually made his way to Antiochus. The charge that Hannibal had plotted with Antiochus is unsupported, but after he became a member of the Syrian court, he certainly advised the king demand his surrender. He advised the king to attack. Certainly advised the king to attack the Romans. After Antiochus III's defeat, Hannibal went to Anatolia, known as Turkey now. Anatolians were the original Anatolians were black. They were Japhites, but they was conquered by the so-called white invaders. I call them Edomites. But in 183 BCE. But the Romans, but what means it is known, what is unknown, but put themselves in position to demand his surrender. Unable to this time to escape arrest, in 183 BCE, Hannibal committed suicide in the ancient port city of Labicia, Anatolia. For present day Discalilius, or how you ever say it, in Turkey. It's in Turkey. Present day in Turkey. I ain't gonna mention the other. That's a mouthful. I'll say Jabiz, Turkey. That's where he killed himself. Rather than face capture by the Romans, he took a suicide. That's what happened to Hannibal. That's what his political strategy, the Battle of Cannae. That's the ones I've read, and I'm gonna read the Third Punic War. I'll read the Third Punic War. See how much time I got to read the rest of it. 13 minutes and 43 seconds. Okay, I got the Third Punic War on the way. How much time I got? Let me see here. You know, this stuff is long. Hannibal is no joke. I've seen what's going to happen. This is when Hannibal was gone. This is when, the second he killed himself, and he did a great success, and he challenged Rome. That kind of hurt Rome a little bit. The Third Punic War. Numidian King Manisa. Numidian was an ancient Berber kingdom in present-day Algeria. Well, actually, the Berbers were, they called them, now the Romans called them barbarians. I don't even like the term Berber or barbarian. And most of the Berbers were Canaanites. They were black people. They were not mixed breed. And later, the Berbers came back as Moors and defeated Rome when Rome fell. That's what happened. and the Franks were what you would say, you know, us or whatever, and they defeated them. Now the Franks were not Japhites, by the way. They were I don't know what they were, and I ain't gonna get into the history of that. But whose country abutted Carthage to the west and directly provoked the Third Punic War? Through his alliance with Rome in the previous war, he was able to gain permission to reacquire lands Carthage has taken from Numidia, and since Carthage was originally established in Numidian land with his corporation, Messina could theoretically have occupied all the territory Carthage controlled rather than attract too much attention from Rome. The Numidian king reclaimed small pieces of the territory at the time when Rome was occupied in other parts of the Mediterranean. In 1500 BCE, Carthage complained to Rome about their allies' acquisition, but received little satisfaction. 3 years later, Rome sent an embassy to investigate, the leading member of which was the senator Cato. Seeing the renewed the bounty of Carthage within Carthage, political factions struggled in 151 BCE, and a strong democratic party that took an aggressive stance to expel those who favored cooperation and perhaps even union with Numidian from the city. Carthaginian complaints. The Rome grew more strident as their rejections of Massanesia. Massanesia grew more insulting. Massanesia also sent appeals to Rome, pressing his claims. In 151 BCE, the Carthaginian army under their leader Hannibal attacked Numidia, but was defeated, and after being besieged in their camp, was virtually destroyed by starvation. The violation of the peace terms, as well as Cato's oratory into the Senate, convinced the Roman government military action was necessary. Hannibal, however, was evicted from power in Carthage, and emissaries were sent to beg forgiveness on any terms to avoid war. An army had been dispatched by the time the embassy arrived, and they gave the Senate a virtual blank check to avert conflict. The Senate demanded that their army should be allowed to do anything it wished. All territory and possessions of Carthage became Roman control. 300 hostages surrendered. The ambassadors agreed to this total surrender and additio interfidum, and return for their surrender, Rome guaranteed the Carthaginians freedom, their own laws, nominal control over all their territory, possessions of personal and public property. Unfortunately, the arrival of the army brought even more difficult conditions. The Roman commander Manilius obligated the city to surrender all its weapons of war. They did. Reportedly, armor weapons for 200,000 men were turned over to the Romans, as well as 2,000 catapults. One final condition was unacceptable: the demand that the city of Carthage be destroyed and all the inhabitants removed inland. Whenever you took on the sea, you remember the great fleets you once had, the spoils you captured. That's the women. The women were the spoils, and the harbors into which you brought them to fill your dockyards and arsenals. Appian quote in Dory and Dudley, Rome Against Carthage, page 116 in that book. Carthage responded by declaring war on Rome. So they went to war again, and Rome defeated them again. Here's the battle. Carthage could not hope to take the war to Rome, but only to force the Romans away from their capital. Carthage was the best fortified city of its day, completely walled for its 21-mile perimeter, and with access to the sea for resupply. The city was divided in southern halves. Megara and Basiria, and respectively. In spite of the earlier surrender of weapons, the citizens began producing new swords and spears and shields and javelins and catapults at the prodigious rate. The women of the city cut their hair to serve as rope for the catapults. In their desperate situation, the Carthaginian government pardoned Hannibal. He took command of an army 25,000 to 30,000 outside. 25,000 to 30,000 outside the city, based on the province of Byzacina. Byzacina to the south and southwest. The main city there, Nephris, dominated the supply route to the farmland beyond. Rome had 80,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry on site, with the port city of Utica, which had surrendered without a fight, just to the northwest to serve as base. They had no siege engines. However, 3 direct assaults against the western walls proved disastrous. A foray across the Lake of Tunis, known as Tunisia now, I just mentioned in part 1. Together, I just talked about this war, part of this battle, the Third Punic, and gathered would rather into the serious Carthaginian cavalry opposition, but ultimately sufficient wood was gathered to build 2 rams. The Roman had some success against the southern fortifications, but the defenders rebuilt the walls, then sailed, destroyed the rams. As summer of 149 grew, 149 grew hotter. The Roman camp between the lagoons became to the unhealthy, so they relocated to the southern end of the city. Roman ships anchored there to provision the army, but they were almost completely devastated by the Carthaginian fire ships. By the years, in the end, the Romans had made a little progress. 148 BCE, Manilius changed his strategy somewhat. He moved his camp from south of Carthage to the northern flank. Rather than press the siege, he instead gathered supplies and made plans to attack Nephris, where Hannibals' force was based. On Manilius' staff was the young Scipio. They said young Scipio Alamilianus, later known as Scipio Africanus. I don't know if that's the same Scipio or a different one, but Scipio Africanus was his real name, but he called himself Aemilius, adopted grandson of the Scipio. Okay, he's an adopted grandson. Okay, I'm about to read this. Scipio Aemilius, he's adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus. He already conquered Africa, the northern part, which was called Africa today, who have won glory in the Second Punic War. I just read that part in this vid right here. I'm just doing, this is part 2, and I read most of it in part 1. If you check that out, I talked about the Second Punic War in part 1. He advised against Nephris, but was overruled. When Aemilius was on the verge of defeat at the hands of the Carthaginian cavalry, commander Himilico and Phalmes, and Scipio's timely arrival with reinforcements covered the Roman retreat. He then played a key diplomatic role. Massinicius offered assistance early in the conflict had been brusquely rebuffed. Now the Romans needed all the help they could get. Massinicius invited Scipio to join the Roman delegation visiting him. When they arrived, they found Massinicius dead. He was in his 80s. And his 3 sons awaiting Scipio, who was charged with choosing the successor. He chose all 3. One to rule in the palace, one as a minister of an affairs, one as a minister of the justice, each according to his talent. Scipio brought foreign minister Galusa with him back to Rome camp, along with a large cavalry force. The arrival of Numidian reinforcements had a profound effect on Himilico Phamesis, who perhaps sensed a change in the winds and defected to the Romans. That was the one high point of 148 BCE for the Roman campaign. Menelaus had decided to attack other than Carthaginian cities, both to keep his army busy and to allow them some booty to maintain their morale. Slaves. What they mean by that is slaves and women. I was conquer and capture, and they was getting down over there. These attacks had mixed success. Carthage even spared some manpower to aid at the siege of Hippo, and some money of an uprising, and seemed to have been in the mold of his adopted grandfather. Scipio took charge in the spring of 147 BCE, and he arrived to confront a crisis. Menelaus had gained some success against the Megara section of the city, but his men has been cut off and the morale was low. Scipio went to the work expelling the multitude of camp followers and focusing the army of his task. No rewards without victory. And meanwhile, Hannibal was recalled to take charge of the city's defense, leaving Diomedes, probably a Greek mercenary, that's what it says in here, in charge of the mobile force. Scipio launched an attack on Megara with an early success, but withdrew under pressure. Hannibal responded by concentrating his force into Bosria, then torturing Roman prisoners on walls. This was intending to stiffen his troops' defense resolve, but instead motivated the Romans. Even the Megara's defense lightened. Scipio realized that an assault on Bosria was necessary since the harbor was there. He spent the summer and built the fortifications, a series of palisade ditches with the sharpened stakes at the bottom, wall facing the city with regularly spaced observation towards a fourth city toward and center. This is completely isolated. Carthage was from landward approaches. Scipio next began to attempt to block off Carthage's seaward supplies. He began building a mole across the mouth of the harbor. Carthaginians responded by digging a new outlet to the sea due to the east from their circular harbor. They also began building ships out of whatever material they could find. When both fleet and outlet were completely, they sailed, but unacceptably did not attack empty Roman ships. When they finally mounted an assault on the third day, the Romans were ready to drove out their quay. Now hold on, I done skipped something. Okay, Romans were ready to drove them back. Unfortunately, the bottleneck in the new outlet kept many Carthaginian ships exposed, and the Roman ships dealt with them harshly. Scipio then assaulted outer quay. That's what I meant. Yeah, I skipped over. Excuse me for that. Protecting the commercial harbor, bringing the catapults and rams. This strategy suffered a setback, but when a night attack from the city destroyed most of them. But Scipio patiently rebuilt them and constructed fortifications as well. He finally managed to breach the walls, then breached them again, and after the first repair, Scipio maintained pressure on the city but could not insert his men and through the breach. He spent the remainder of 147 capturing what towns still remained loyal to Carthage and defeated their mobile force at Nephris. At the 22-day siege that left the city of Carthage completely alone with no source of supply, this provoked an offer to negotiate with Hannibal, but he would not concede to Scipio's demand that the city be razed, means destroy. In the spring of 146 BCE, Scipio invoked the Carthaginian gods to abandon the city, but then he launched his final assault, and it came from the weakened walls near outer quay, and this time the Romans did break through. Hannibal soldiers, when reinforced, entered the fray. hold on, did I skip Romans? Hasdrubal set the harbor buildings alight, but it did not slow the Romans down. But what did it slow them down was the sack of the temple of Apollo. Was Golden Dome proved to inviting the soldiers. But when reinforcements entered the fray, excuse me to that again. When reinforcements entered the fray, the slow work reintroduced the Basra citadel, the citadel, perceived the tall houses along narrow lands proved to be individual fortresses. The fighting waves was house to house, room to room, hand to hand. For 6 days, Scipio finally ordered the houses burned to allow easier passage, and many non-combatants died in conflagration. To prove the final blow to Carthaginian resistance. On the 7th day, they surrendered wholesale, 50,000 men. Women and children give themselves up to slavery. Hasdrubal, his family, along with 900 Roman deserters, were all that remained in the temple of Isinum. He did not display the children. Okay, hold on. Did I skip? Hold on. Resistance on the 7th day, surrender wholesale. Okay, 6 hours batch way. Okay, buddy. The proven found this on the 7th day, surrendered 50,000 men and women and children, giving themselves up to slavery. Yep. Hasdrubal, his family, along with he did not display the valor of his earlier namesakes, but crawled to Scipio begging mercy as the deserters decided to die in the flames of the temple. Seeing his dishonor, Hasdrubal's wife called out to him, "Wretch," she screamed, in a voice which raised itself above the universe. Then, is it thus you seek to save your own life, while you sacrifice ours? I cannot reach you in your own person, but I kill you hereby in the persons of your children. And it says, Abbott History of Hannibal, page 292 and 293. That book, I want to check that book out. She stabbed his 2 sons and threw them into flames, and then divided in after them. This is getting to the part of the sack of Carthage. Rome eventually Carthage. Scipio rewarded his men with the time, sack of Carthage. This is the sack of Carthage. This is the last piece of it. And see how much time I got. Damn, it went too long. 32 minutes, 51 seconds. Good. Okay, sack of Carthage. Rewarded his men with time to plunder the city at their leisure. That done, remained the city of what was set ablaze and burned for 10 days. Rome decreed that no house should be built nor crop planted there. But 100 years later, the city was refounded by Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, and became the city of the enlarged province of what would say Africa, named after Scipio Africanus. By the 2nd century CE, this timeline, now modern time, Carthage had become the largest city in the west after Rome. The new Roman Carthage became first famous educational center, especially for a law and rhetoric, and then focus for Christianity. They created Christianity, by the way. They were at the time they created Christianity, which we know as Catholicism. It's all the same thing. In the West, Western civilization, especially in the time of Tertullian and Cyprian, the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Carthage fell to the Vandals. Carthage fell to the Vandals 439 CE, and became the capital of the king of Gassaric. But after the victory of Belisarius, Byzantine general, in 553 CE, Rome fell in 464 CE. This is when Rome was falling. All the stuff they was conquering didn't last long. They fell. The empire was same crap that we going through now. And remained loyal to the Roman Empire in the east until the Arab conquest. That's Ishmael and some of the Hamites and some of us that formed what we would say the Byzantine Empire, the Moorish Empire. So at the end of the 7th century, the Arab conquest, when it was destroyed the second time in 698 CE, but 711, that's when they started ruling. It said that it was the original city burned, and Scipio wept. His tutor and the historian Polybius spoke to him. Is this not the splendid sight? He grasped his hand and said, a splendid sight indeed, Polybius, and yet I am in fear, and I know not why, that someday the same order will give to destroy my own country. And that's quoted by Dudley in Rome Against Carthage, page 174. You can read that. The control of North African farmland provided the storehouses of grain for Rome and for the next several centuries. Not until the Vandals conquered the region in the 5th century did it cease being Rome's granary. It became so once again when Belisarius captured the province for the Eastern Emperor of Justinian in a century later. So yeah, this is part 2 of all the way from sack Carthage to Battle of Cannae, and this is my ending and closing of Hannibal. So with that, I want to say Yah bless. This is information about Hannibal. So with that, I want to say is shalom.